Be Me case. Not my real name, but it's what they called me at my old job. I'm a marketing strategist and data analyst. Basically, I'm the guy who looks at spreadsheets and tells the artsy people what will actually sell. My job is to be the voice of reason in a room full of people who think a viral TikTok is a business plan. For years, it worked. The agency, let's call it Apex Strategies, was a machine. A little chaotic, deadlines were always a nightmare, but we were good. We got results for our clients, and that was the only thing that mattered. The culture was simple. Do good work, don't be an idiot. If your campaign made the client money, nobody cared if you were quiet or loud or weird. I'm quiet. I don't do office small talk. I don't care who's dating who or what you did on the weekend. I care about conversion rates, audience demographics, and A/B testing results. My reports were the foundation for every major project we landed. I'd spend a week buried in data, then emerge with a multi-page document that was basically a treasure map to the customer's wallet. The creative team would take my map and draw the pretty pictures on it. One of the senior guys, a copywriter named Raul, got it. He was an old-school ad man, smelled faintly of coffee and cynicism. He'd read my reports and nod. "Numbers don't lie," he'd grumble. "The rest is just decoration." We had a good system. I remember a meeting maybe a year or so back before everything changed. A big client, a beverage company, wanted a new campaign. The creative team was presenting their idea. It was all flash. They had a whole concept built around some obscure social media influencer who was popular for like 15 minutes. The presentation was slick, lots of energy, cool graphics. The junior account managers were practically drooling. The owner of the agency was smiling, ready to sign off. Then it was my turn. I didn't have a flashy presentation. I just put 3 charts up on the big screen. The first showed that the influencer's primary audience was 13 to 16-year-old girls. The client's target demographic was 25 to 40-year-old men. The second chart showed the influencer's engagement rates, which were tanking hard after a recent controversy I'd uncovered. The third showed a massive, untapped market segment that was being completely ignored by the competition. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't criticize anyone. I just said, the data suggests an alternative strategy. If we target this overlooked demographic with a message focused on reliability instead of trends, the projected ROI is 40% higher. The room went quiet. You could feel the air go out of the creative team's balloon. The owner looked at my charts, then at their presentation, then back at my charts. Raul finally broke the silence. He pointed a thumb at me. "That's why he gets paid the big bucks. Now let's make a campaign that actually works." That was Apex Strategies. Facts over feelings. It was a good place to work if you were competent. Then, sometime in the spring, the owner decided we needed to evolve. He'd been to some tech conference and came back with a head full of buzzwords. He announced he was hiring a new creative director to modernize our corporate culture and foster a more inclusive environment. That's when Soraya walked in. Her first all-hands meeting was something else. She didn't talk about marketing or clients or revenue. She talked about synergy and psychological safety and bringing our whole selves to work. She said her goal wasn't just to win accounts, but to create a brave space where everyone felt seen and heard. I looked around the room. Some of the younger staff were nodding along, eyes wide. A few of the women in HR looked thrilled. Raul, sitting next to me, was staring at her with the blank expression of a man trying to calculate how many more years he had until retirement. Jackson, a talented young graphic designer, just looked confused. I didn't feel anything. It was just noise. Corporate jargon that would fade in a few weeks. Or so I thought. Soraya brought her own person with her, a junior account manager named Hannah. Hannah was her cheerleader, her enforcer, her #1 fan. If Soraya was the high priestess of the new church, Hannah was the most zealous convert. The first change was the meetings. We suddenly had mandatory weekly check-ins. They weren't about work. The first one started with Soraya asking us to go around the room and share one thing we're grateful for and one personal challenge we're facing this week. When it was my turn, I said I was grateful for a new data analytics software we'd just acquired, and that my challenge was integrating its API into our current system. Soraya gave me a tight little smile. She explained that the point was to share something personal, to be vulnerable with the team. I just stared back. My personal life is mine. My work is what they pay me for. I didn't see the connection. The next week, I had a critical deadline for a client. I sent an email saying I couldn't make the check-in. An hour later, I got a calendar invite from Hannah for a one-on-one meeting. The subject was commitment to team values. In that meeting, she explained that my refusal to participate was creating a fracture in the team's emotional ecosystem. She said that my focus on just the work could be interpreted as passive-aggressive and was making others feel like their contributions weren't as valued if they weren't purely technical. I told her I had a multi-million-dollar account on the line, and that was my priority. Her response was that no project is more important than the people. I knew right then this was going to be a problem. Then came the workshops. Mandatory, of course, 2 hours every other Friday. The first one was on unconscious bias. The facilitator, someone Soraya hired, had us do exercises where we had to confess our hidden privileges. I just sat in the back, silent. What was I supposed to say? I grew up in a normal, middle-class family. I worked hard in school. I got a degree. I got a job. I kept my head down and did the work. I wasn't oppressing anyone by generating a pivot table. The real shift happened during a project meeting for a new client, a men's grooming product company. The team was brainstorming ideas. Hannah, eager to impress Soraya, pitched a whole campaign centered on deconstructing masculinity. The tagline was something like, "The real grooming is on the inside." It was full of vague platitudes about men needing to be more vulnerable and emotionally open. Soraya loved it. She called it brave and subversive. Everyone else in the room was nodding along, afraid to disagree. I waited for them to finish. Then I pulled up the client's brief and our own market research on the screen. I calmly stated the facts. The target demographic is men aged 30-50. Our research shows their primary purchasing drivers are product effectiveness and a desire for a traditional, masculine aesthetic. This campaign's messaging is diametrically opposed to what the data tells us the customer wants. It will alienate the core base and likely fail. I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I was doing my job. My job was to prevent the company from wasting the client's money on a campaign that would bomb. Hannah's face went pale, then red. She didn't argue with the data. She couldn't. Instead, she looked at Soraya and said her voice was trembling a little. She said that my delivery was incredibly hostile, and that by presenting cold, hard facts, without considering the emotional intent behind her idea, I had created an unsafe environment for creativity. I was speechless. I just presented data. Soraya put a comforting arm on Hannah's shoulder. She looked at me, and her eyes were like ice. She said that at the new Apex Strategies, how we communicate is just as important as what we communicate. She told me my approach was a relic of an old, toxic way of thinking, and that I needed to be more mindful of my colleagues' feelings. The meeting was dismissed. The campaign idea was quietly shelved, but the damage was done. I had been officially branded as the problem. Not my work, not my results, me, my personality. The way I thought was now considered toxic. After that, I was on the outside. My input was still required, because nobody else could do what I did, but it was treated like a necessary evil. Soraya and Hannah would hold pre-meetings before the actual meetings to workshop creative ideas in a safe space without my judgmental presence. They would then bring the polished idea to the main meeting, and I would be expected to simply provide the data to back it up, not to question the core concept. It was completely backward. They were decorating the house before laying the foundation. Several times, I had to point out catastrophic flaws that would have been obvious if they'd consulted the data first. Each time, I was met with sighs and resentful looks. I was the bad guy, the dream killer who kept bringing up inconvenient things like reality. Raoul saw what was happening. He pulled me aside in the kitchen one afternoon. He told me he'd tried to talk to Soraya. He'd explained to her that my directness wasn't personal. It was just how my brain worked, and that the company needed it. He told her that she was mistaking a lack of effusiveness for a lack of collaboration. According to him, Soraya listened patiently and then told him that he was enabling my problematic behavior because of his own ingrained male biases. She suggested he attend an extra sensitivity training seminar. Raoul just shook his head as he told me the story. "This isn't about marketing anymore, Case," he said. "This is a crusade for her, and you're the dragon she wants to slay." The atmosphere in the office got weird. It was divided. There was Soraya's inner circle, mostly the younger staff who were all in on the new culture. Then there was the old guard, me, Raoul, Jackson the designer, and a couple of the other quiet, get-it-done guys in development and media buying. We just wanted to do our jobs. We started eating lunch together, mostly in silence, a sort of unspoken alliance. We didn't complain much. We just observed. We watched as budgets were approved for wellness initiatives, while our requests for essential software upgrades were ignored. We watched as promotions were given based on who gave the most impassioned speeches at the weekly check-ins rather than on performance. It was like living in a bizarro world where all the rules had been inverted. The final straw came about a month ago. We got a chance to pitch for a massive new client, a huge international brand. Landing this account would be a game changer for the agency. It was an all-hands-on-deck situation. This was my turf. For 2 weeks, I barely slept. I dove deeper into data than I ever had before. I analyzed their competitors, their global sales trends, their social media sentiment, everything. I built a complete, multifaceted strategy from the ground up, with models projecting costs and returns down to the last decimal point. It was the best work I had ever done. It was airtight, unbeatable. The day of the final internal review, before the big pitch to the client, the whole leadership team gathered. I presented my strategy. I walked them through the data, the logic, the execution plan, step by step. When I finished, the room was silent. Even Soraya looked impressed for a second. The owner, who was actually paying attention for once, was beaming. This was money in the bank. He said it was brilliant. Then Soraya cleared her throat. "Thank you, Case," she said, in that carefully neutral tone of hers. "That was very thorough." She stood up. "But I feel it's missing something, a soul, a human element." She then presented her own vision for the campaign. It wasn't a strategy. It was a word cloud of feelings. She talked about starting a conversation, engaging with the community, and building an authentic narrative. There were no numbers, no data, no methodology. Her core idea was to launch a campaign that completely ignored the product and instead focused on a divisive social issue that was only tangentially related to the brand. It was commercial suicide. The owner looked confused. He looked from her vague, feel-good slides to my dense, fact-based report. "Soraya," he said carefully, "I'm not sure I see how this translates into sales." Soraya smiled condescendingly. "You're still thinking in the old paradigm," she said. "Modern consumers don't buy products. They buy ideals. They buy into a story." I couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just a bad idea. It was professional malpractice. "With all due respect," I said, keeping my voice as level as possible. My analysis of the target demographic's social sentiment shows that the issue you've chosen is extremely polarizing. A campaign like this would not only fail to attract new customers, it would actively alienate a projected 60% of your existing loyal customer base. I pointed to a chart in my report. The potential brand damage is catastrophic. Then I pointed out a logical flaw in her creative approach that was so basic, a first-year marketing intern would have spotted it. I wasn't attacking her. I was saving the agency from self-immolation. But she didn't see it that way. Soraya's face turned to stone. In front of the entire leadership team, including the owner, her professional composure finally cracked. Her voice was low and shaking with fury. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she hissed, pointing a finger at me. "This is the toxic, masculine need to tear down a woman's creative vision with logic and facts. This isn't collaboration. This is sabotage." She turned to the owner. "I cannot work in an environment where my leadership is constantly being undermined by this kind of aggressive, condescending behavior." The room was dead silent. Nobody knew what to say. The owner just sat there, looking like a deer in the headlights, completely lost. Soraya gathered her things. "This meeting is over," she announced, and stormed out of the room. Hannah, of course, scurried out right behind her. I just sat there, my presentation still glowing on the screen. Raoul caught my eye from across the table. He didn't say anything. He just gave me a slow, grim nod. A nod that said, "Well, that's it." I went back to my desk and stared at my screen, but I couldn't focus. The air in the office was thick with tension for the rest of the day. I knew what was coming. It was no longer a question of if, but when. The next morning, I walked into the office, and it was like walking into a vacuum. The usual morning chatter was gone. People at their desks would look up, see me, and then immediately stare down at their keyboards, as if they were the most interesting thing in the world. Soraya's disciples looked at me with a kind of smug pity. The rest, the ones who were just trying to get by, looked scared. I knew the call was coming. I just didn't know when. It happened around 10 a.m. An email from HR, not Hannah, formal. "Meeting with Soraya. Please come to her office now." I didn't even bother saving the document I was working on. I just closed my laptop and stood up. The walk to her office felt a mile long. Every eye was on me. Her office door was open. She was sitting behind her large minimalist desk. Hannah was in a chair off to the side, a laptop open, poised to take notes. The official scribe for the execution. Soraya gestured to the chair opposite her. I sat down. I didn't say anything. She started by saying how much they valued contributions to the team, and how they were trying to build a forward-thinking and emotionally intelligent workplace. It was a script. She was reading from a mental teleprompter full of HR-approved phrases. She said that despite multiple attempts at coaching and dialogue, my behavioral patterns had not aligned with the core values of the company. She never mentioned my work. Not the quality, not the results, not the revenue I had generated. None of that was relevant anymore. She talked about my failure to integrate. She mentioned my unwillingness to participate in team-building activities, and my tendency to use data as a tool for confrontation rather than collaboration. The final nail in the coffin, she explained, was my behavior at the pitch meeting. She called it a clear-cut case of creating a hostile and toxic environment for creative expression. Hannah was typing furiously, documenting every word. I just sat there and listened. It was like watching a play, a very bad, very predictable play. I realized she wasn't just firing an employee. In her mind, she was vanquishing a villain. She was cleansing her perfect new world of the last stubborn stain of the old one. I was a symbol of everything she was fighting against, logic, stoicism, an unapologetic focus on results, male toxicity in her vocabulary. When she was done with her speech, she finally looked at me, expecting some kind of reaction, an argument, a plea, an outburst. I gave her nothing. I just looked back at her, my face completely neutral. "I understand," I said. My voice was calm. That one phrase seemed to bother her more than any fight I could have put up. It was like I was refusing to play my part in her drama. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face before the corporate mask slipped back on. "HR will be in touch regarding your final paycheck and severance details," she said crisply. "Hannah will escort you back to your desk to gather your personal belongings." I stood up. "That won't be necessary," I said, looking at Hannah, then back at Soraya. "I can find my own way." I turned and walked out of her office. The walk back was different. People weren't pretending to work anymore. They were just staring. I got to my desk and pulled out the empty cardboard box I'd stashed under it weeks ago. I always knew this day might come. I started packing. There wasn't much. A few reference books, my favorite coffee mug, a small framed photo of my old dog who passed away years ago, a couple of notebooks filled with scrawled equations and charts, the tools of my trade, the artifacts of a job well done. The office was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Then, another sound, a loud, sharp clap. I looked up. It was Raoul. He was standing at his desk, having just slapped it with his open palm. He was looking straight at Soraya's office. She and Hannah had come out and were standing there, arms crossed, overseeing the proceedings. Raoul was a big guy, and when he spoke, his voice carried. "Unbelievable," he said, not to anyone in particular, but to the entire room. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound disgust on his face. He looked over at me, then back towards Soraya. "You just amputated the brain of this agency," he announced. "Congratulations on the successful surgery. I'm sure the patient will make a full recovery." His sarcasm was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Soraya's face tightened. "Raoul, that is highly inappropriate." He ignored her. He turned to his computer, clicked his mouse a few times, and the office printer whirred to life. He walked over to the printer, picked up the single warm sheet of paper, and strode right up to Soraya. He held it out to her. "I quit," he said, effective immediately. "I find the work environment here to be intellectually hostile." He used their own buzzwords against them. It was beautiful. Soraya was too stunned to take the paper. He just dropped it at her feet. A collective gasp went through the office. Raoul was a fixture, an institution. He'd been there for over a decade. Then another voice. "Yeah, I think I'm done here too." It was Jackson, the young designer. He was standing up, taking off his expensive headphones. He looked at Soraya. "I came here to learn from the best. You just fired the best. There's nothing left for me to learn here." He walked back to his desk and started unplugging his custom-built computer. Before Soraya could even process that, another man stood up, the lead web developer. A quiet guy who built and maintained the entire back end of all our client websites. He was a wizard, the only one who understood the labyrinth of custom code that held everything together. He didn't say a word. He just put on his jacket, picked up his backpack, and walked over to Raoul. He gave him a nod, then looked at me. "Good luck, Case," he said quietly. It was more than he'd said to me in the past year. He walked out the door. No resignation letter. He just vanished. A fourth man stood up, the head of media buying, the guy who managed millions of dollars in ad spend every month, the guy who had all the relationships with the ad networks, the guy whose phone number was on all the critical accounts. "My job is dependent on accurate analytics," he stated calmly, looking at Soraya. "The source of those analytics is no longer with the company. Therefore, I can no longer perform my duties effectively. This is my 2 weeks' notice, but I'll be using my accrued vacation time starting now. He was gone. It was a rout, a total collapse. In the span of less than 10 minutes, Soraya had gone from a triumphant manager firing a problem employee to the captain of a sinking ship who had just watched her entire engine room crew walk off the job. I finished packing my box. Raoul and Jackson were waiting for me by the elevators. I walked past Soraya and Hannah. They were frozen, their faces a mixture of shock, fury, and dawning panic. I didn't say a word. I didn't look back. The elevator doors closed, and the three of us just stood there in silence for a moment. Then Raoul let out a long, slow breath. "Well," he said, a small, grim smile on his face. "That happened." We found out what happened next in pieces, from a couple of sympathetic former coworkers who were still inside. Apparently, after we left, Soraya tried to rally the remaining troops. She called an emergency all-hands meeting. She gave a speech about how this was a positive turning point for the agency. She said they had shed the last vestiges of the old toxic culture, and that now they could truly flourish as a cohesive, collaborative, and forward-thinking team. She called the mass resignation a coordinated act of patriarchal resistance to female leadership. The problem was, while she was giving her speech, the real world was intruding. The first call came during the meeting. It was the massive international brand we were supposed to be pitching. Their VP of marketing was on the line, asking for the preliminary data models I had promised to send him that morning. Soraya, flustered, took the call. She tried to explain that they were refining the strategic vision. The VP, a no-nonsense numbers guy, cut her off. He didn't care about the vision. He wanted the data. She had nothing to give him. She couldn't read my reports, let alone explain the complex models I'd built. She asked for an extension. The VP said, "Don't bother," and hung up. The pitch was dead. A multi-million-dollar opportunity gone. While she was reeling from that, the second crisis hit. An intern accidentally deleted a critical block of code from the website of their second-largest client. The entire e-commerce section of the site crashed. The client was losing thousands of dollars every minute. They called, screaming. Soraya paged the web developer. Then she remembered. He was gone. Nobody else knew the system. He had built it. It was his baby. They tried to call an outside contractor. The contractor looked at the code and said it would take him a week just to figure out what was going on. Panic was setting in. Then the third wave hit. The regular, everyday clients. The calls started flooding in. Where is my weekly performance report? Why has my ad campaign spending suddenly stopped? I need the analytics for the Q3 review, and I need it now. These were all tasks that I, or the media buyer, or the developer had handled. The people left in the office were the creatives, the account managers, the HR staff. They didn't know how to run the engine. They only knew how to paint the car. Hannah was reportedly running from desk to desk, trying to put out fires, but she had no idea what she was doing. She was an expert in feelings, not in Google Analytics. The whole agency was grinding to a halt. Work wasn't getting done. Deadlines were being missed. Clients were furious. The final blow came that afternoon. The owner, who had been on a golf trip, finally started getting calls, not from Soraya, from his angry clients. He called into the office, and according to the person who told me the story, he wasn't screaming. It was worse. It was a cold, terrifying rage. Soraya picked up the phone, and he just asked one question. "What did you do?" She launched into her pre-rehearsed speech about coordinated sabotage and toxic male employees. He cut her off. "I don't care about your workplace drama," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I care about the fact that our biggest client just called me personally to tell me we're fired, and that our second biggest client is threatening to sue us for breach of contract. Fix it, now." He hung up. She couldn't fix it. There was nothing to fix. The vital organs of the agency had been ripped out. All that was left was a hollow shell, filled with people who were great at talking about work, but not so great at actually doing it. 2 weeks later, the news hit the industry trade publications. Apex Strategies had lost 3 major accounts and was laying off a third of its staff. The article was filled with anonymous quotes from former employees. They talked about a toxic culture of positivity, where feelings were prioritized over facts, and competence was punished. Saraya's name was mentioned as the architect of the new culture that led to the mass exodus of key talent. She was fired the day the article came out. Hannah was let go the same day. The final scene of this story happened last week. Me, Raul, Jackson, the developer, and the media buyer were all sitting in a booth at a quiet bar. We hadn't planned it. We'd just kept in touch, a sort of informal support group. The developer had a new job that paid him 30% more. Jackson was doing freelance work and was happier than ever. The media buyer was being courted by 2 different rival agencies. We were all fine, better than fine. We were talking about what to do next. The idea had been floated, half-jokingly at first, that we should start our own agency. A small, lean, no-nonsense shop focused purely on results. No mandatory check-ins, no wellness workshops, no buzzwords. Just the work. The more we talked about it, the less of a joke it became. We had the talent, we had the experience, we had the connections. We could actually do it. Towards the end of the night, Raul raised his glass. Everyone went quiet. He looked around at all of us, the so-called toxic remnants of the old world. To the brain, he said, and to work that speaks for itself. We all raised our glasses and drank to that. There was no cheering, no loud celebration, just a quiet, shared understanding. We hadn't set out to destroy anything. We were just trying to do our jobs, but in the end, reality has a way of asserting itself. You can't build a house on a foundation of feelings. Sooner or later, it's going to collapse. We were just lucky enough to get out before it came down on our heads, and now we're going to build something new, something strong, something that lasts, something that works.